As you heard, I'm T. I use they, them pronouns. I'm in the third year of my PhD, Research Creation at Concordia. And for those of you who might not know what research creation is, it basically means that we're all artists and researchers, and that our artwork is part of the research, which is pretty new and kind of novel within academia for that to be considered the case. So I'm going to give a brief overview of my work and then talk about how I use auto theory as a method of inquiry. Auto theory basically means that you're combining autobiography and theory, and that's something that I think all of us to an extent use in our work. So there are four very diverse examples of how our own personal perspectives combine with the kind of work and research we do. So over the past 2 years, I've spent about 2,200 hours, which is the equivalent of 3 months in virtual reality. So I'm hanging out there, conducting research with people, and I specifically use a platform called VR Chat, which is basically where VR users can come and hang out together. So I mentioned this amount of time not to brag about how often I'm like tethered to my computer, but to just emphasize that it's a place that we go not just to play games, but where we go and hang out, socialize, and really live a big portion of our lives. And I started playing during the pandemic at a time when I was feeling really disconnected from queer communities, so it offered this great way to virtually connect with queer folks. And I was amazed not just by the number of queer people I met, but I really felt like in many ways it was a place that queerness permeated it. So like in the physical world, it often feels like queerness is this thing that exists within the individual, and it's just kind of these little pockets, and we have to really struggle to find each other. And there it feels like it's part of the environment, part of the space that we live in. So this is a picture of a typical night in VR Chat. So this is not a digital image, this is me and my friends. So we're all sitting around the fire. That's my partner Cara with the purple hair, and she's on the Zoom. Hi Cara, thanks for coming. I'm next to her, and then next to us is our friend Chelsea, long-time friend of ours, and then that's our friend Lux, who is this great avatar with big rainbow wings that we can stretch and play with and wrap around ourselves. So it's pretty like radical form of embodiment. We're sitting by the fire. Our friend Kitty DVR is off screen, just like playing piano and singing to us. So these are the kinds of things we do together. And the other kind of unique thing about this platform is that it's almost entirely user-generated content. So that means that in these queer communities, you get a lot of insight into how queer people are envisioning the metaverse, which are shared virtual worlds, and creating these communities and making avatars and worlds that offer this form of gender expression and gender euphoria. So all of this is serving as the background of my research, in which I'm exploring this rich intersection of VR and queer embodiment. And so it's a series of projects and also this concept that I call virtual queerality. So ultimately it's just this really interesting community of self-taught makers and hackers, and I think the significance beyond just what happens here is that we're in this moment where we're potentially heading into widespread adoption of VR, AR, XR, and rather than having Mark Zuckerberg dictate to us about what those worlds and what those bodies are going to look like, I think it's a really key moment to see what's happening in these spaces already and how people are dealing with ethics and interacting with one another. Can you go to the next slide? Thank you. This is the arrow. Go down. There we go. So this is a picture of me sleeping next to my partner Cara. So this is what it kind of looks like both digitally and physically when we're hanging out together. This is like also what I do almost every night. I fall asleep in VR, which I realize sounds kind of dystopian, but it's just what happens. So with her permission, I often write about our experiences and kind of what we do in VR, people we hang out with, the raves that we go to, stuff like that. So obviously, as you can tell, my work emerges from lived experience, and I mentioned auto theory, the commingling of theory and autobiography. And it's this method of inquiry, and there's this great book if you're interested in this idea. It's about the history of auto theory, which has been going on for decades, came out of feminist practice. The idea of the personal is always political. The book is by Lauren Fournier, and it's called Auto Theory as Feminist Practice in Art, Writing, and Criticism. So one of the main ideas of this type of working is that the personal, it's not just a starting point or an anecdote you use to illustrate something else, but is a key way of producing knowledge. And it can also be a form of resistance and a way to center marginalized voices within intellectual discourse or writing, which can often seem really impersonable and impenetrable to a lot of people. So I'm going to read a little bit of my own writing so you get a sense of what this looks like within my work. This is a picture of me as mycelium. So it's an avatar, but it's not a body. So this gray thready thing, I became that, and when I move around, I'm not even legible as a human, which for me is this incredible sense of gender euphoria. Like often we think of queer embodiment as maybe I'm transitioning or I'm presenting differently, but I think it's also this way of moving into the more than human. So it can be really expansive notion of queerness. So I'm going to read about what I was thinking about at the time when I was having trouble finding an avatar I felt comfortable in. A lot of the avatars are very femme, idealized bodies, which is not me. So Kara, who's an avatar maker, was dedicated to my search for the right avatar. So she took me to worlds where I could experiment with hundreds of human and non-human forms of embodiment. Becoming plants, animals, and objects invited endless opportunities for improvisation and play. We became mycelium in an underwater grotto, intertwining our fungal threads as we dove through fluorescent waters. As shape-shifting jellyfish, we nibbled on one another's tentacles as we raced through a luxury hotel. She became an oscillating Burger King billboard, and I a stick of butter, hopping around as I tried to kiss her. The closer we grew and the more we played, the more radically present I felt in both my virtual and my physical body. I was experiencing a new form of gender euphoria, one that persisted when I took off my headset. I'm just going to show a quick video so you get a sense of what kind of work I'm doing out of these spaces. So we'll go to YouTube. So this here, just to describe to you what you're seeing, so it's this cool slime avatar, and it's also an avatar where you can clone yourself. So I'm doing this dance with myself, and again I'm kind of moving in and out of looking like a human. And for me, it's really fun to have that kind of permeable boundary. And in the background, you'll hear a poem I wrote where I'm bringing in a lot of the theory that I was working with. So you'll get a sense of that.
Physical and virtual bodies are as two segments of one soul circular course, one soul movement in its two phases. I disorient myself. Trackers, headset, and controllers accumulate impressions on the skin. My foot tracker twists and shoots my leg through my chest. A shiver runs down my spine, molds me into a moaning strip, lined with the flash of latent possibility. Virtual cracks birth queer bodies. In the middle of the soft moment with my mother, her spine folds and she slips into her womb. She keeps talking since her perception Bodies do not dwell in spaces that are exterior, but rather take shape by dwelling. I dwell in a forest, in the arms of my lover, in a nest of pillows. I sleep, glitching and dreaming. I can still feel my lover's kisses. We are fed up with seeing with our eyes, talking with our tongue, thinking with our brain. We become octopus bodies, full of gaiety, ecstasy, and dance. Flipped upside down bodies, called to walk on our head, sing with our sinuses, see through our skin. The body without organs is what remains when you take everything away. Our organless bodies, installed in the portal between two worlds, cradled in the amniotic fluid of an egg, suspended in collective queer fantasy.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for staying and actually sharing this time with us. This is a combination of many events and meaningful connections. So this time I'm just going to go through one of my latest projects that is part of my research creation in the sense of how combine collectivity, collective thinking, collective creation, not only coming from my own artwork and also my own methodology, but within the methodologies how we can work together. And this is one of the most important parts for me is nighttime, reflecting about the night and who can walk in the night, activate the night, and be present at night. So the next one, please. So this is basically framework of my research creation, right? So I do this in all the presentations because this is a way of enunciating, locating myself within the different fields that I work. This sandwalk is just a tool for me. It's a tool and a tool that presents different methodologies that I can also integrate other fields, such as migration is important. I'm an immigrant who came to the global north around 22 years ago. So that's also part of this reflection within feminist studies and digital media, because I do work as well with augmented reality, and I will explain what and how this is informing my work. So in 2018, I started working and residency at a public school, no, a public library, and we did with another colleague, John. I think no, it's not in this frame, but we can play it. It doesn't matter if it's without some. Wallace Johnson was part of the Brooklyn League of Women Walkers. So what we did was meeting weekly in Red Hook as well as Sunset Park, and we did reflections upon how we do embrace the public space collectively, but also embrace certain conversations, embody those conversations about intersectional feminism, meaning it's not only about being gender and ethnically identified person, but also there is other axes that play and inform your experience in the public space, such as age, ethnicity, race, gender, caste, sexual orientation. And that was important for us. So we not only walk, but we map those experiences. And we found different, if not alternatives, ideas, speculations, if we want to call, of how the public space can be and can create a safe space for all bodies. So this is some of the snapshots that happened during those workshops. And we can stop the video, and then we can go to the next slide. And that gave me the opportunity to work with VR as well, in this case using a 360 camera, talking one-to-one with 6 different, well, I did more than 6, I did different cities around the world. I have the privilege to travel, and that allowed me the opportunity to talk to other female-identified walkers, or people who want to walk, and they used primarily the public transportation and mediums that are not necessarily a car. So it's mostly walking. And with that, we did it with a 360 camera, and then after that, I translate those videos with a VR headset. So it was the virtual reality that I was using is basically it was not necessarily interactive. It was the only interaction you have is a dark room where you select your journey, and then you see through this journey the 360 video around with all the conversations that we have. So it was like an individual walks, and that was Flores La Caminata. And after that, the next slide will show how I translate this into a video performance, because I felt that VR, in my case, once you take out the headsets, people will experience the conversations, the oral histories, but they will never experience some of the oppressions. They will never experience the violence that certain bodies actually live day by day in the public space. So how this can be translated into other mediums that are more immersive, but also eloquent through all these experiences of gender violence in the public space. So I did work with Bib Corringham and Julia Santoli in a video performance, and presented it several times. And we used several elements in on stage, implying also the video, live video, VR, and other few segments of the Flores La Caminata, and reflections of film essay, or implying film essay with VR, with 360, with the 360 camera on stage. And that was a little bit more eloquent to me to think how VR can be translated into other mediums, but I also understood that VR, could we go to the next one please, can be also taken over festivals and symposiums that I went with a mobile headset. So I don't need a whole computer, it's just like a headset that it has a built-on microcomputer there. So I was walking with the people that joined the workshop, and then after the workshop they have the VR. Or sometimes I also have the VR experience with Flores La Caminata at the beginning, and then after that we actually walk in the city where this conference or this festival took place. So it was a more generative conversation on what you see through these headsets, and how do you experience in your location? How is your story within the site-specificity of a space? And I think that was a more generative experience within VR and real space, real-time space. Next one, please. And then after that, I transpose the next step on that. And I reenacted through this headbone headset. Well, not a headset, it's just like a sunglasses that instead of the sound just goes through your brain, right? So you can hear it through your brain, and you can, and when I was using it, this is not how people use it. People use it just to listen to music or news or whatever without plugging it into their head, into their ears, but in my case, I use them to reenact those experiences of La Nesra Caminanta. So I did one that I did with my mother in Ciudad Estado de Mexico, which is one of the most deadliest cities around the world. And I juxtaposed this in Chicago. So we were walking in the city of Chicago, and I was repeating the words of my mother and her experiences in Estado de Mexico. So I was like, whoa, I really like this juxtaposition between space and oral history. It's resonated through my body as the receptacle of this experience, which it belongs to me because I live there with my mother, and that's why I was feeling that I have the right, or I have the possibility, the living experience to reenact that story. Thank you. Can we go to the next one? And then, speaking of which, is now that I moved to Montreal, I started also another collective. I think collectives work well when it's about ephemerality. When they work for certain years, certain desires are implicated within the members of the collectives, and that's something that I'm very aware, and I work there. And so we work with Women's Walk the Walk from 2019 to 2021, and that allowed me to actually understand the geography of Montreal. As in the other projects I was working in New York with other collectivities, this one allowed me to do it in Montreal. And with that, next one, I work as well with another collective now that is called Sonos Sororidades, where we speak on, we are doing a research on how sound creates collectivity and also sonic agencies, meaning how creating sound makes a community process through Feminist. So most of the producers, all the producers and all the musicians and all the sound labels, public spaces are based in South America, but also they are female identified and part of the LGBTQ community. All of them. For us, it's very important because we understand the majority of the music industry, sound art industry, has been framed from a Western perspective, but also a very white and masculine perspective. So this is why we are trying to decentralize that perspective. We are trying to found these other marginalized voices within sound or within the sound production and trying to find and define our own lines of research. And that was one of the installations that allow me to explore that sense of collectivity. Next. And so now I'm going to talk about sound walking in this case. This is another sound walk that I did with another collective that I formed and I have the fortune to be part of. It is called Courage Feministes Montréal, Feminicize Montréal. So they do place letters in the walls as a graffiti, but instead of being graffiti, is we paste with letters and we formalize the statements together. So in a not hierarchical way. So everybody decides what to paste, where to paste. We have to walk in the night to decide where is the location for this we paste, and so and so. So what I did with Sinowalk, and you can see it, you can also, if you're in Montreal, you can walk it. How it works is basically, and you can see the instructions in the back. Can we go to the next one? No, sorry, maybe let's go back, yeah. This one, the instructions that, on how our method, sound augmented reality works, as you can see in this postcards, I'm actually going to pass the other one so everybody can have a sense. Some of them are in Spanish, some of them are in Slovenia, Slovenia. But this is because I've been doing these augmented realities in different locations, but it's the same procedure. So you geolocate, and now we can go to the next one. You geolocate your sounds, and then when you walk with your phone, download the app, When you geolocate the sounds, the person who is going to walk around the space is going to activate the sound, and the sound is going to be audible. It is important to understand that you are not in an empty space. You are in the city. You are basically combining your sound with an ecosystem. So you have to find and define the sound design that you are doing within the context and the acoustic ecology that is around. So I always do this. And how much time is it?
That's 14 minutes in.
14?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to
wonderful.
Okay, I'm going to stop soon. So if we go to the next one, this is how it works. This is what you have, right? Next one. And what I learned is like, in order to do the sound walks, for all of them and for the next ones that I would do, the nighttime was important, because one of the reflections that I had was like, who is walking at the night? It's mostly, the majority of the time are male subjects or male individuals, but when we walk in the global south, it's impossible, it's very dangerous. But then how we do it depending the urban setting. So for me, doing this project was claiming the night. It was actually going blue, making the design, deciding how so. And the last sound walks that I did, it was activated through the night, and not with headphones, but with speakers. So we can go to the next one. And I did also an essay on that, on the idea of walking at night, but collectively. Because there is the idea of the flaneuse, which is a female woman that walks alone. Yeah, but who can do that? Because even though you can be in a country where you can, yeah, you have race, you have ethnicity, you have class, and you have gender. Like, even like a black man would be it would be an act of, a danger act to walk in certain places, as we know in the US. So walking has to be thought deeply of how, when, who, what's in the public space. And this is part of the reflections that I do, even though through a feminist perspective, that can go through and navigate through those experiences. And I think that might be the next one, please. And so I did another sound walk at night in Montreal, but we can go because I have to wrap it up. And in this one, I actually invite people. The most of the time it's open, right? It's an open call, people go. But in this one, I only invited women of color who were immigrants from South America. And during 3 hours, actually from midnight to 3 in the morning, we walked. And they start making different improvisations, instructions, prompts, and this was transmitted to the radio. Insomnia, radio insomnia, for people who cannot sleep. And then, can we go to the next one? And this is the last project, and this is how I'm going to finish. Sono Solo Walks, where I actually geolocated, as you saw. Next one. And I did it in Berlin, and also the next one, and in Slovenia. So in these two places, I invited Corazón de Robota from Argentina, and then from Cristina Herzog from Palestine, and Aquelarre Superciudad from Bolivia. So they sent me their audios, I did a route, I walked many times for that route at night, and then we walked together with a speaker amplifying those voices, and we have, in the end, a space to reflect with everyone who went with us. And the next one, and this is some of the pictures of that night walk. But we reflect upon that relation of gender, very acute, because even in Slovenia, that for some people think it's safe. Many queer bodies, trans persons who participated in the walk, because also they help us and they put some of the sounds in Vienna, They participated also giving us their experience. They say, and he said, like, no, it's not safe for me to walk at night, even though if my look is like this, or I pass like a cis man, still is not safe for certain bodies and certain gender orientations and gender expressions, as well as mine. And then in the end, for me, just as a final reflection to wrap up with this, is, okay, so we do have this relational experience in the public space, so how do we walk together, or what kind of experiences can allow us to take back the space at night, to take back the public space, not only as privilege for a certain population, but also analyzing that certain cities might not even be possible, walking individually. I'm not taking that right away, I'm not just saying like, you know, this is an impossible task. It's just like maybe through these conversations that I have during the walks, what are the strategies, how we can collectively think, even in tools, or even in informing others about the risk, but also the involvement of taking those spaces as ours. And I think I'm going to finish there. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, okay, well, thank you for being here. Thank you both for sharing your projects. I think I'm gonna talk about a bit my project right now, so more the creative side of my PhD project. And I'm gonna echo a bit of what T and Amanda were saying about the question of like collaborative work. Inside my work is also an important component. So what I work on in my creative work is experimental filmmaking. So I'm going to talk a bit about our latest project. Oh, it's taking some time. It's a short film, experimental film that's 3 minutes long, and it's done mostly through these types of techniques, which is abstract filmmaking, abstract animation. And where I develop these different type of painting on 16mm clear leader. So leader is the pieces of plastic that you actually put on film that kind of like pull the film into the projector. So it's not the one that has like the photochemical substrate on it. It's just completely clear, so you can use it for animation. So it's traditionally used in experimental film for animation, especially to like train animators. It's done with workshops with kids, and I've done workshops also with adults. So this is the kind of making that I was working on. And the methodology that I would say that I developed while working on this project, I would name it collaborative figuring. So why figuring? I use figuring in how it is opposed to literalism or like representation. Thinking with the notions that Donna Haraway has developed with the concept of the figure. So thinking with the cyborg, of how the cyborg is both like figurative and material, and how this figuration is like synonym of an allegory, a metaphor, or a symbol, and is not the same way that usually science works. So through like literalism or representation. So the figurative here in the project that I worked on is through figuring the notion of ripeness. So I worked with a poem from a friend of mine who's a trans poet, Sally Fullerton, and who wrote this poem called Ripe. And so I made a short 3-minute film as a response to this poem. So I'm going to show you right now like an extract of the film. So it's just the beginning, the first minute.
times can you forget you felt this before? Even last year, the conversation from there was like a towel-like, slowly to the keenness, clarity.
Your head peeking into a bedroom in search of sleep, and then saying safely, a small tempo, breathing.
Yeah, so it stops a bit short because it's just the extract. Yeah. And so in this short film, I'm creating kind of like a visual in response to this prompt of ripeness. So working with colors that are having actually like a color gradation between green to yellows to orange and reds, and then browns, kind of like denoting the process of ripening and then of rotting. And the beginning and the end of the film start with just kind of like this white background gesturing towards like a certain cyclicity, kind of like the seasons and also the ripening of fruit or of flowers. And use this as kind of analogy for the trans experience, thinking about what is actually the time, the moment of being trans. When is it that, is it actually being, are we able to actually fix a point of like, when is it that you become trans? Noting that there's a lot of different ways to gauge what it is to become trans. Is it when an individual understands to be trans for themselves? Is it when they're socially recognized as trans? Is it when they're legally recognized as trans? And so this is kind of like an exploration of what like is a trans temporality, what is trans time in a way that can be understood maybe as non-linear, or how can we, challenge linearity with a time-based medium? And so I'm trying to do this, trying to think about the ways that, trans is often actually not linear. Often because of the ways also socially and economically it's actually difficult to support transitions. So you can have transitions that kind of start and stop, or start and detransition or retransition, or you can have leap forwards. So it's actually not so linear. So that's kind of like the figurative part here. And then the techniques that I use are, can be understood as materialist, so really working with the materials of film itself by, painting directly on the film. And then it gives, for myself, and this is like intentional in my making, is trying to make something that is very sensory and affective in this way that is abstract, it's colorful, it's working with form. Working with 16 millimeter is also, you have kind of this magnification of the image, so it makes all of like the little dust particles appear super big and makes you feel like very close to the film. So there's kind of like this embodied relationship to the image. And I'm thinking with the ideas here of like Laura Marks, who talk about haptic images and how haptic images are different from visual images that are supposed to represent. So, an image of a tree, of a person, etc. And you have like these abstract images which would actually call more multisensory relation to these images, and one that is also like haptic or tactile. And I think this is actually really interesting to think about when working with the ideas of trans, because of the ways trans is sticky and is knotted with questions of appearance and of visuality. Trans, in its essence, like trans, we can think ontologically, is a challenge to visual realism in the ways that trans is actually affirming to not be as one appears in the beginning of the transition. So there is kind of like this fundamental challenge to what is visual and how we can trust the image, or representation. And so I think that this kind of like sensuous relation to images and materialist also intervention process and also relation to what you're seeing calls upon the trans capacity of imagination. So the trans capacity of being able to see yourself otherwise. And so this is an idea of Kelly Keegan. So this idea of seeing yourself otherwise is, understood as a trans capacity. So the film, both in its process and what it is showing delves with questions that relate to trans. So that's the figurative part of it. And so while I was working on the film, I happened to give a few workshops. So I was developing myself these new techniques of painting, with new techniques for myself, painting on the clear leader, and then giving workshops, a few different workshops, four different workshops at universities, during a queer festival, and also inside of a classroom. And so I invite participants to do kind of the same thing that I'm doing at that moment. I bring my material, my paints, my inks, my markers, and I invite participants to really explore abstract making. So we're not trying to make a little smiley or a little star, we're really just trying to play with colors and forms and try to see okay, if you put a line of a marker on 20 frames and then you play that in the projector, what does it look like, Or if you make all of these splotches, what kind of animation does that create? So that's the kind of things that I was, inviting participants to do and explaining to them in the ways that it relates to trans in this challenge to visuality, and so insisting on abstraction. And so I'll just show a little video here. That's the end of our workshop. So we create a big loop of film and then we put it through the projector, and everybody has to feed the loop in the projector to be able to watch it together. So there's this collective aspect to it. And so in this workshop, what I ended up doing is I ended up scanning what we had created together and then adding some of my own animation to it, and then it was integrated into an installation in a collective show here at the fourth space. And I'll just show a short extract of that, collective film. Here, I would like to note that these are the contributors to the work of T and Amanda being part of these contributors as well. So there's no sound here because it was an installation, so it's only image. It's also a short extract. So this is more like the second part of this, methodology of collaborative figuring is the collaborative part of it. So obviously making with others in the film Ripe. So I'm in response to a poem that Sally Fullerton made, and then of course I invited friends, trans, queer, non-binary friends to read the poem. So that's the voiceover that's in the poem. So that's also collective. And that is putting these voices together for me is gesturing towards the collectivity of trans and the collectivity of trans becoming. One of the parts also that was attentive in my process, and that maybe relates to the idea of auto theory, is the relations that I had with the materials that I was making, and also when we were in the workshops, the relations that all of us together were having with these materials, because painting on clear 16mm leader, it will allow you to do certain things, but not others. Some things will stick on it, a lot of dust will stick on it, a lot of impromptu things will happen. And so there's this kind of the materials themselves shape what will happen, what we're able to do together. So there's I would say, responsive relation to the participants' work and my own. We're working in responsivity and also with these materials. And then, so in this way, I would say that these collective films, the ones that would come out of the workshops, the films themselves are the recordings of what happened in these workshops. So they're the recording of this collective event. And so that's what becomes the film. So that's these two parts, the collaborative and figuring. And I would say that in another way that we can understand the term of figuring is, the figuring out of being trans. And I would say that this figuring out of being trans is also collective and in responsive relation to others and materials and the materiality of the body. So that's my talk. Thank you.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Laura Magnuson, and thank you everyone for being here. My presentation, I'm going to show a film, and it's a silent film. But before I start it, I'll just tell you a little bit about what you'll be seeing. It's a 12-minute silent film, and I won't play the full film, but I'll play some of it to give you an idea of it, which was a shot entirely underwater, 70 feet beneath the surface of Cozumel, Mexico. And I, along with the water, are the work's central characters. The cinematography is done by Liquid Motion Film, and production assistance by Pelagic Venture Scuba. So I'm going to start the film. In my research and creative practice, I explore how visual art forms can serve as testimonial tools to communicate felt experiences of trauma and violence in ways that are not possible through spoken and written language alone. I begin from my own experiences as a survivor of sexual violence and my own struggles to share my story. Customary avenues for giving testimony often present barriers that make it difficult for many survivors to fully share their experiences. Police statements and court testimonies, for example, require people to compartmentalize their experiences to provide particular information on and in particular terms. The pursuit of factual truth via these word-based means of testimony, in my experience, actively excluded my felt experiences. And trauma is experienced and stored in the body. So Blue Then, which is this film, becomes the impact statement I was not permitted to give before the law. Through body movement, visual metaphor, and editing strategies, it seeks to give form to my subjective experience, psychological and emotional impacts, and how they are registered in my body. Alone on an ocean tundra, wearing a protective clamshell-like parka and winter boots, I arduously move, exhale, and burrow through the afterlife. The medium of water with its destructive potential and capacity to heal, in addition to the weight of an air tank with its promise of survival and threat of impending emptiness, hold the fullness of traumatic experience. In this silent psychic landscape, I bear witness to the complex nature of trauma and the ongoing process of healing. Water is my collaborator, a nurturing and threatening force, supportive, receptive, restrictive and different, a continuation of myself psychologically and materially. Water as a medium through which traumatic memories may be worked through and emotional truths conveyed. Water as a means to visibilize what might otherwise not be seen, such as my breath, visibilized as air bubbles. My somatic expression underwater was not predetermined. I did not make and execute a shot list. Rather, possibilities for movement and actions and gestures were explored and developed on site. It wasn't until months later back in the studio that I sequenced the film. Underwater production raised a number of challenges. So in the film, I don't wear goggles, which means that during production I wasn't able to see. My lack of vision, in addition to my inability to speak or hear underwater, made communication difficult. In order to carry out production on the seafloor in a safe manner, we had to develop nonverbal communication strategies and map out plans above water. On the bottom of the ocean, without my voice, hearing, or sight, I seemed to lose sense of my place in the world. With little understanding of my orientation, I noticed myself retreating inward, inhabiting my body with increased awareness. This is interesting to me, given trauma survivors can often feel disconnected from their bodies. So for me, scuba diving has also become a way for me to feel connected to my body. And I'd like to share a little anecdote here about how I got into diving. It was my dad, after I had experienced what I experienced, he knew that I loved water. And I come from a landlocked city in the Canadian prairies, but I had always had an interest and love of water. And so he suggested that together we go diving. And what was so striking to me is the experience I had while I was diving. I felt like the water could somehow hold me, how I could exhale into the water and feel that something of what I was carrying was being received. And something really interesting to me was that I began to develop a kind of confidence in taking care of myself in this underwater environment. You have to, monitor the oxygen in your tank. You have to make sure that you come up at the appropriate time. And so to be able to do that and to take care of myself in that way was incredibly empowering. So it was through this experience with my dad, and then that I kind of came to this work. And then a few years after that, in my master's program, began to returned to the seafloor to make this body of work. Traumatic experience reconfigures relationships between self and world. It can open up new perspectives. It can yield new knowledge. How does it change us? What does it teach us? In my work, I'm asking, how can artistic interventions offer new means for survivors to share their felt lived experiences? And in turn, how can such storytelling strategies expand our collective understanding of trauma's lasting impacts? So thank you very much.
Thank you all so much. How are you all feeling? I feel like coming into this space here and sharing your research is an intimate gesture. To share with all of us, a lot of us don't know each other, and to open up and to share research from my experience, my perspective, is something that is demanding on the body, and the soul, and the spirit. So I really thank all of you for being here in this new space and sharing your research with not only all of us here, but all of those on Zoom as well. And I really appreciate everybody for being here and support. And the idea of this encounter, there's so many differences. We have threads of commonality, collaboration, whether it be water, whether it be film, whether it be VR, whether it be walks and sound, but also that there's a lot of difference. So I'm really curious about how we create spaces that really question what it means to be in difference and what it means to be connected in difference in our research and our sharing. So thank you so much. I don't know if you want to open it up to questions or kind of let this go, and then if there's questions, kind of let it trickle through the next few minutes.
Is there anything in the chat?
I'm looking, I don't see anything right now. If there are questions, see the last.
If there are, but there's no pressure.
Are there any questions?
You said 70 meters below?
Oh, 70 feet.
70 feet.
Yeah. Sorry if I said meters, that would be wild. I don't have that kind of license to go there.
Was it cold?
No, because I shot it in Cozumel, Mexico, and the waters are quite warm there if you're under for an extended period of time. And and actually my clamshell parka, because I think of myself as a clam in this video. The parka actually does offer warmth in the same way that a wetsuit does, because the water that gets in between the fabric and my skin then keeps it warm. Yeah.
I think there's also a question in the chat. If you can.
I also wanted to ask, how long did you spend in the water? How
For
many?
the whole.
Oh, so that the time underwater is dependent usually on how long the air lasts. So, and how long the air lasts and how long you can be under has to do with how deep you are and a bunch of things. But I worked with, each dive was basically an hour, and I filmed across 2 separate trips, and I probably filmed across 16 dives, but I culled from that. So it's probably 16 to 20 hours of working underwater.
You're the person who was recording.
No, so I'm the person who's the moving, and I worked with an underwater cinematographer who was holding the camera. So we would make our plan above water, and then we'd be like, okay, I want to try to get these kinds of things. But when when we go underwater, then it's sort of an improvised space because I can't see him or talk to him. And I had a safety supervisor, Fernando, from Pelagic Venture Skooma, and he was off camera but was present in case, because I'm not wearing my scuba gear as intended. Like, I've taken my vest off, so if the mouthpiece came out, he would
Come.
yeah. Put it back in. Yeah.
There is a question in the chat if you want to read it.
Okay.
I can also read it.
Okay, let's see here. Oh, okay. So this is a question from Gustavo, and I wanted to understand more about the relationships between the body, gender, and media. What are the theoretical frameworks that drive your works? The history of humanity, current definitions of humanity, and the post-human. What are your views? I'm going to just read this out because I think they're invitations and prompts. What are your views on the current trends in AR, VR, and AI research? What are your thoughts about the future of performance and media, thinking through the current trajectories of these evolving technologies? And what are the opportunities as well as the obstacles that you foresee that need to be overcome? And so,
how much time do we have?
but if any of these prompts resonate, then I invite you to take them up here.
It's a collection.
What fabulous observations.
I also think too what's really unique about all of your research is the research creation element. That most universities in the States and globally aren't using research creation as forms of knowing. So I'm curious, for all of you in such different ways, how your creative research, what are the challenges of integrating your creative research as research? Here, I don't know as much about UCSB specifically, or this part of the state specifically, but they're usually, it seems pretty separate. So I'm curious for you, coming from Montreal, but a lot of you do work in other places, what is the temperature? How do you find it to be challenging or not, or ways of knowing within research creation?
Well, I'd say one of the challenges is that having been an artist long before I identified as a scholar was that my view on making art was, if I can say something with words, I'll say it, but if I can make artwork about it, I'll do that, because it's the things that don't need to be said. And there still is pressure within the institution to explain exactly what you're doing, say all these different theories that you're using, and at times we've talked about it feels kind of like doing 2 degrees, it's like you're still doing all of the theoretical work, all of the creative work. So I do think that challenge is still there, and it still doesn't feel like it's taken totally seriously, that the work itself doesn't need to be explained, that we're offering all of these effective ways that can't necessarily be written about. But I think one of the greatest strengths is that everybody can see these things and feel something when they see them. So I do think it makes theory and thinking and making more accessible to people, where, you know, we can all like list off our bibliography of who we're working with, but that's not interesting to a lot of people or accessible to a lot of people.
I'd say it's also like, it's a new thing in itself. To think with making is very different than studying works or criticizing works or having like this exterior, this is the relation of like media studies, studying media, things like that. It's like we're not studying media, we're making things, we're making the media and we're thinking through it. So it's like, how I see it is like every research creation project invents its own methodology. Each is its unique articulation of theory and of practice. And it's how you do it. As you're saying, T, it's also like, it's less about making it explicit, it's about making it and finding a place for the theory and a place for the making, and how does that relate specifically to the things that you are interested in studying. So you have to invent it. It doesn't exist before.
I think for me, it's important that the framework that I'm trying to approach with Somos Sororidades is that we want to stop looking at a theoretical framework coming only from a Western perspective, an Occidental perspective, because as we are analyzing the colonial feminism, many of those thinking analogies are also an hegemonical way of framing what, for example, in music, music is, in how is going to be also related to sound studies, same thing. So as several feminists also, decolonial feminists from Latin America have called, es un régimen del aural regimes, or regimes, right? How we've been learned, and also in the global south, to codify, to refine, to analyze what music is from a Western kind of perspective. So in my personal research, we're trying to define ourselves not from understanding that yes, there are influences, but also that there are acknowledges coming from the global south, from situated acknowledges from indigenous, and also in this case in Montreal or in Canada, Turtle Island, from First Nations, that way long they approach those reflections, but they never were actually recognized as such. So we're trying to define those and understand those approaches within contemporary practices in sound. In my case, with sound walks. So my next iteration of the work that I'm going to do is going to Bolivia and going to Peru and understand my practice of walking within indigenous communities who have been walking since centuries, and it's a sacred actually activity that is related to the embodiment, but also through other acknowledges in sound as well. So I think from that decolonial thinking, I'm interested also to understand that the framework of gender is also complex, and how it's reconstructed within those frameworks.
I just have one little thought here, just something that I think about or I grapple with as also being someone who comes into a PhD program and comes into my research as a studio artist. I feel like research creation is just another name for what I have always been doing in my practice, and I think that it's not novel research creation. It's maybe academic institutions starting to value what artists do as research. So I don't know, sometimes I actually think of my PhD work and my art practice as two separate things, because how do I formalize my practice into this context of a PhD? But I mean, we're very fortunate in our case being in the program we are in, which is an interdisciplinary humanities program, that we have a lot of freedom to find these ways to formalize the work.
Are there any other things that were in the chat that you feel?
There's some responses from Gustavo from while you were your response.
Thank you for being such an active chat member, Gustavo. Your thoughts are so interesting.
Yes. Definitely. I have questions for all of you specifically, but I'm going to share them with you.
I asked them. We'll talk.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much to everyone for being here, and thank you so much to SB Cast and to the Matt Lecture Series, to Danielle and Ryan, and to Yasin, Nefeli, and Yezer. And anyone else that I'm forgetting to
And to you for running like a lot of tech at the last second. Like, good job.